Hello everyone, this is R.S. Miller at the endtimenews.org, and today is September 28, 2012. Syria fires missiles across the border into Israel. Israel's fears that Syria's civil war could spill across its northern border began to be realized this week as mortar shells and rockets fired by the Syrian army landed in the Golan Heights. A number of mortar shells landed near agricultural fields belonging to Israeli kibbutzim in the northern Golan on Tuesday. A day later, a short-range missile struck in the central Golan. Neither of the incidents caused any injuries or damage. In both instances, the munitions were believed to have been fired by Syrian government forces battling rebels close to the Israeli-Syria border. Both the forces loyal to Syrian dictator Bashar Assad and the Sunni-dominated rebels are overtly hostile towards Israel, and Jerusalem is concerned that either may at any moment try to drag the Jewish state into the raging conflict for their own benefit. So real has the threat become that Israeli army last week held an exercise simulating a surprise cross-border attack by the Syrian army or rebel forces. Israel also believes that Lebanon's Hezbollah militia may start a fresh round of conflict in order to influence the outcome of the Syrian civil war. At a UN General Assembly meeting earlier this week, President Obama made it clear that the U.S. supports the Arab Spring movement in the Middle East, while at the same time condemning the attacks on U.S. embassies in the region. Also in the speech, he made comments on Syria and Iran, saying that the Assad regime must come to an end, and that the Iranian leadership is propping up a dictator in Damascus and supporting terrorist groups abroad. He also issued a warning to Iran, saying, "The United States will do what we must to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon."
Today we must reaffirm that our future will be determined by people like Chris Stevens and not by his killers. Today we must declare that this violence and intolerance has no place among our United Nations. It has been less than 2 years since a vendor in Tunisia set himself on fire to protest the oppressive corruption in his country and sparked what became known as the Arab Spring. And since then, the world has been captivated by the transformation that's taken place. And the United States has supported the forces of change. We were inspired by the Tunisian protests that toppled a dictator because we recognized our own beliefs in the aspiration of men and women who took to the streets. We insisted on change in Egypt because our support for democracy ultimately put us on the side of the people. We supported a transition of leadership in Yemen because the interests of the people were no longer being served by a corrupt status quo. We intervened in Libya alongside a broad coalition and with the mandate of the United Nations Security Council because we had the ability to stop the slaughter of innocents and because we believed that the aspirations of the people were more powerful than a tyrant. And as we meet here, we again declare that the regime of Bashar al-Assad must come to an end so that the suffering of the Syrian people can stop and a new dawn can begin. In Iran, we see where the path of a violent and unaccountable ideology leads. The Iranian people have a remarkable and ancient history. And many Iranians wish to enjoy peace and prosperity alongside their neighbors. But just as it restricts the rights of its own people, the Iranian government continues to prop up a dictator in Damascus and supports terrorist groups abroad. Time and again, it has failed to take the opportunity to demonstrate that its nuclear program is peaceful and to meet its obligations to the United Nations. So let me be clear. America wants to resolve this issue through diplomacy, and we believe that there is still time and space to do so. But that time is not unlimited. We respect the right of nations to access peaceful nuclear power. But one of the purposes of the United Nations is to see that we harness that power for peace. And make no mistake, A nuclear-armed Iran is not a challenge that can be contained. It would threaten the elimination of Israel, the security of Gulf nations, and the stability of the global economy. It risks triggering a nuclear arms race in the region and the unraveling of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's why a coalition of countries is holding the Iranian government accountable. And that's why the United States will do what we must to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
An Iranian attempt to launch a satellite into space failed when the missile carrying the satellite exploded shortly after liftoff, completely destroying the satellite. HIS Janes reported that the accident took place in May and that Iran's space agency has made a great effort to hide it from the public's knowledge. The failure is expected to set back Iran's space program considerably. Western experts said that the mishap shows Iran is facing difficulties in ballistic missile development. Janes revealed that the U.S. spy satellites followed the attempted launch, which took place in the Space Center near Tehran. Black spots were seen covering the area around the launching pad immediately after the accident. Netanyahu, tired of waiting for Obama, draws own red lines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday signaled he had waited long enough for the Obama administration to get serious about stopping Iran's drive for nuclear arms, and he drew his own red line, literally. Using a cartoonish chart depicting a bomb with a lit fuse, Netanyahu dedicated his address before the UN General Assembly to trying to educate those who have had trouble understanding just how dangerously close the mullahs who rule the Islamic Republic are to obtaining a nuclear bomb. Netanyahu noted that it had taken Iran's regime well over a decade to do 70% of the work needed to test a nuclear warhead. During that time, the international community tried in vain to diplomatically convince Tehran to hold its nuclear program. Now Netanyahu cautioned Iran is well into the second phase of the process and is stockpiling and enriching the uranium needed to construct the weapon. This phase, said the Israeli leader ominously, will be much shorter. In other words, the time for diplomacy has passed and the time for ultimatums has come. Senior Jihadi writer says Muslims in America and Europe should slaughter non-Muslims. On September 18th this year, Al Rahman, a senior writer for leading Jihadi forum, suggests that Muslims living in Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and the U.S. slaughter people and display their decapitated heads along roads with a statement reading, "This is the punishment of those who insult our prophet." In Pakistan, a 16-year-old Christian girl gang raped for hours by Muslims. A new case of gang rape against a Christian minor in Pakistan. The rape occurred in broad daylight for hours in a private home where 3 young Muslims, all under 30 years of age, abused a defenseless girl. Bonnie Mendez tells Asia News that demonstrates the powerlessness of the poor in Pakistan, which is reflected in all its evidence in events such as the sexual abuse of Shamala, which took place September 20 last, but has not only now been revealed by the press. She also states that a 60-year-old Muslim merchant raped a 10-year-old Christian girl back on September 4th. 50 Taiwanese boats intrude near Senkakus. Coast Guard cutters deploy water cannons. About 40 Taiwanese fishing boats and 12 patrol ships intrude into Japanese territorial waters near Senkakus Islands on Tuesday morning to assert Taipei's claim to the Japanese-controlled chain. The Armada further intensified the territorial dispute that has already seen ties between Japan and China deteriorate. It was the first time such a large number of foreign vessels has intruded into the territorial waters since the diplomatic row over Japan and China broke out last month. The Taiwanese fishing ships started entering waters near the islands around 7:40 a.m. and had left the area by midday, according to Japan Coast Guard officials. The Coast Guard repeatedly sought to prevent the Taiwanese ships from approaching the islets by spraying water over them, but the accompanying Taiwanese patrol ships responded to the warnings by announcing that it is their right to operate in Taiwanese territorial waters, according to the Japan Coast Guard. There were no major clashes between the Japanese and Taiwanese maritime authorities, but officials confirmed that 3 Taiwanese patrol ships had fired their water cannons at the Japanese patrol boats. Japan vows no compromise on islands row. Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda has insisted that there could be no compromise with China on the ownership of a disputed island chain and denounced attacks on Japanese interests. So far as the Senkakus Islands are concerned, they are an integral part of our territory in the light of history and of international law, Noda told reporters at the UN General Assembly in New York on Wednesday, referring to an archipelago in the East China Sea that China knows as Diaoyu. It is very clear, and there are no territorial issues as such. Therefore, there cannot be any compromise that could mean any setback from this basic position. I have to make that very clear, he told reporters. The resolution of this issue should not be by force, but calmly, through reason and with respect for international law. China's Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi told his Japanese counterpart Koichiro Gemba at the United Nations on Tuesday that Japan had been guilty of severely infringing its sovereignty, according to Beijing's foreign ministry. The Chinese side will by no means tolerate any unilateral action by the Japanese side on the Diaoyu Islands, Yang told Genba, according to his office. Over 300 Syrian people killed in one of the bloodiest days. On September 27th, more than 300 people were killed in Syria on Wednesday, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said, in one of the bloodiest days in 18-month uprising against President Bashar al-Assad. World leaders meeting at the United Nations have expressed concern at the continuing violence in Syria, but are deadlocked over their response to the conflict, which the observatory says has claimed 30,000 lives since March 2011. The British-based organization, which monitors violence in Syria through a network of activists, said in a report released on Thursday that 55 people were killed in rural areas around Damascus. They included at least 40 who appear to have been shot in cold blood in a town southeast of the capital. Other activists have put the death toll in El Dahiabia as high as 107, blaming Assad's security forces for what they said was a massacre. Video published by activists showed rows of bloodied corpses wrapped in blankets. The victims shown on camera appeared to be male from 20 years old to elderly men. Friends, life is far too short not to know where you'll end up after it's all over. Most people stick to their presuppositions and never seek the truth for themselves. Far too many times we have been told by trusted sources that a particular thing is a particular way for a particular reason, and we believe it. Then at some point down the road, we find out that it wasn't that way at all. But in this case, we can't afford to leave our fate up to chance or presupposition. It is absolutely imperative that you know for certain that the God of the Bible is real, heaven and hell are real, and that we will spend all eternity either with God or in that other place without Him. Are you saved? Follow the link below and pray the prayer of salvation with a sincere heart, and you will be saved. It is my prayer that God bless each and every one of you with ears to hear, eyes to see, and a heart to receive. In Jesus' name, amen.